Hi, everyone. Sorry for the delay. If you want to blame anyone for this delay, please blame Manav. I accept zero responsibility for this. This is all Manav's fault. He tried to do some stunts, and without testing, you can see the first 3 minutes of me behaving cranky. And basically, like, this is how my show is going to end. I'm going to be the Ellen DeGeneres of live streaming, where people are like, he's so rude. He's such a bad person. Okay, my guests have been waiting for really long. I'm just going to start off pretty much quickly. We were trying something with scheduling this live stream, like a lot of you asked. That's not really panned out nicely, so we're just going to go with this. I'll quickly announce who's coming up. I was going to announce people on Instamojo and PayPal, but we have no time for that. Tomorrow we have Good Simran Khamba, Amit Tandon, and Neeti Palta. On Tuesday we have Hussein Zaidi and Sumaira Sheikh at 4 p.m. And Thursday we have Khan Masti if they show up this time or no. Okay, I'm not going to waste any time today. Super duper late. Again, apologies. I was on time today for a change. I was sitting in front of my laptop at 10:59. And then Manav just wants to ruin my reputation in society. So he just decided to do some scheduling. Okay, I'll just bring on my guests. Let's not waste any time. With a couple of introductions. And the way, if you've never seen the show before, we talk to our guests. And we talk to them for about 45 minutes. And then we take some questions from Super Chat. So get a Super Chats and stuff ready. Cool. Let's go. I'm going to introduce my guest for today. First off is my co-host with the mo-host. Please give round of applause to Mr. Kumar Varun. Hi, Mr. Kumar Varun. KV, what's up?
Hi, Sorabh.
Hi.
Nothing. Am I audible? Like, I'm just checking. Audible?
No, you're audible.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, absolutely audible.
Oh. Yeah. Nothing, Sorabh. Very excited as always to be on your streams and to meet people who I never thought I'll meet on a Zoom call.
Hey, very, man, I make your dreams come true, man. And William Dalrymple is also confirmed.
Absolutely.
See, you send me a list and I make it happen.
I can't believe it.
All right, we want to bring on the person we are both very excited about, author of Sacred Games and Love and Longing in Bombay and Red Earth and Pouring Rain. Also co-writer of Mission Kashmir and a bunch of other things. Please give a round of applause in your minds for Mr. Vikram Chandra. Hey.
Oops.
Oh, oops.
Sorry.
Hi. There you go.
Hi, guys.
Oh,
so nice to hang out.
Hi.
Yeah, thanks for coming. Sorry for the delay. It's I don't know if you know a guy called Manav, but this is all his fault. So just blame him.
No. As a techie, I understand completely. I mean, tech is great until it is not.
Yeah. I love your setup at the back. I'm not sure. Is this your writer's room or is this underground layer for chartered accountants who are trying to rebel against the system?
It's actually my cave at the back of it. So we have a house and then we have a backyard. And this used to be a garage. So one side of the garage is now where I hang out in a very messy fashion. My younger daughter was telling me today, she knew I was going to be on this. She's 10. She walked in and, Daddy, you need to clean up. Like, okay, I'll give it a try.
Listen, I get flack for having my cupboard open at the back. So I think you should be fine.
I see. Yeah. Now you told me I can't unsee that.
Yeah, there you go. And I'm literally keeping it open just to annoy it's irritating me as well, but I just don't feel like closing it just to keep it going and irritating everybody. Anyway, Vikram, I don't know if you met Kumar Varun. That's Kumar Varun. He's a comedian and a quizzer and a man who knows everything about everything in the world.
Yeah. No, I'm a fan, Kumar.
I didn't know. I'm just a man who does research. That's all I do in life. Like when you said my younger one came, I was like, Leela or Darshana? That is how.
Wow. That is awesome. Man after my own heart.
So how do you know his children's name? Like basis interviews and stuff like that?
No, you can find these things online.
Wow. That's okay.
I didn't hack into his passport or Aadhaar card or some ration card somewhere. No, I did not do that.
But he's in the US, so I don't know if you have an Aadhaar card. Do you have an Aadhaar card?
Social security card.
Yeah, social security. Yeah. So it's international hacking. By the way, genuinely very happy to have you here. One of my favorite things about doing this podcast is that it's inducing me to read books that I was anyway planning to read. But then I'm like, he's here. Now you must read. So there's no excuses. So I was reading Love and Longing in Bombay, and I mean that's what it was called then. Just don't want to start a controversy here. Bombay was called
Yeah.
Mumbai. There's a stage. I will repeat this each time I say the title. So
Yes.
I was reading Love and Longing in Bombay. It used to be called that then. Now it's called Mumbai, and it's like it's a series of short stories. And I was genuinely very happy to read one which is about Sartaj Singh.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And so that's my first question: is that I'm just curious whether this short story came first, and you were like, because I think you wrote Love and Longing way before.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
and was it that you were like, I like this character a lot, and I'm going to base an entire 900-page novel on this person?
Yeah. No, I mean, so the Love and Longing was, I finished Redder Than Pouring Rain, which is another chunky novel, and so I thought I should try my hand at short stories, right? Um, More for the like, I seem to publish every 10 years or so. So I thought, okay, let's work in a short form. थोड़ी जल्दी हो जाएगा, then I'll be happy and relaxed. And so,
Huh.
uh, and then the idea that came to me is that I'll try and write short stories, which are experiments in the forms that I love, right? So there's
Right.
a ghost story in there. There's a story about ladies of Malabar Hill engaging in deadly social warfare.
I loved it. That was such a strange, because what's most interesting about your about those short stories is that you're covering years in paragraphs
Right.
and doing
Yeah.
it pretty seamlessly, which I thought was like really interesting. Where you've transitioned from, but I love that. I told my wife that story, and she's like, it was that's great. I think she read it ages back as well. So yeah,
Yeah.
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 And then what are
So
the others? Yeah,
yeah. So then there's various kinds of stories, but then I wanted to write. I'm really into detective fiction, crime stories, police procedurals. So I wanted to write a police story, and so that's where the Sartaj came from.
yeah,
Um, and then usually what happens to me with books is that once I'm done, then I can like cut them off, and I don't want to think about it again, because you spend years doing it, and then the project is done and you're happy to get away from it. But this guy, for some weird reason, stayed with me. I couldn't get away from him. So it just felt like there's some kind of unfinished business with this dude. Um, and then around the time that I was finishing writing Love and Longing, um, I have become really aware of like the organized crime in
right,
India in general, but in Bombay, Mumbai in particular, right? All through the 80s and 90s, um, you know, you could see the influence going wider and more profoundly, like visible in all aspects of life. And then the violence was escalating, right?
right.
So there used to be a time when uh, the scores were settled with like knives or like choppers, right? And then you got pistols, and then suddenly automatic weapons were being used on the streets of Bombay,
Yeah,
right? And like a story I always tell about this is that we lived in Lokhandwala at the time. So my dad and I were driving back from town, and we came up that main Lokhandwala street and driving up it, and suddenly there's automatic weapons gunfire echoing off the buildings. And that was that famous shootout at Lokhandwala, right?
oh
Which was
wow,
happening like 3 blocks away from our house where we live, the apartment building. And then also simultaneously, my family is all pretty heavily involved in the film industry, right? So my mother, Kamna Chandra, she's a writer. So she wrote like Prem Rog for Raj Kapoor and Chandni for Yash Chopra and a bunch of other movies. Um,
942 a love,
and, sorry, kya bol?
942 a love story.
1942 A Love Story. Um, and then my sister's Tanuja is a director and writer, and then Anupama is a critic, and she married Vidhu.
Seven.
Uh, um, so having grown up around those circles, I also knew people who were the target of extortion by the companies, right? And that's been traditional. It goes back decades, right? And I think many of the people watching us will know how it works, right? So you have a movie that is going to release in about a month, and then you start getting phone calls, right? So and so भाई ने बोला है कि इतना खोखा उसको deliver कर देने का, right? And then what you're supposed to do is negotiate, right? नहीं भाई, I'm a poor man, I can't afford that. And then you reach like a deal, and then you're supposed to deliver the money, right? And it's serious, because if you don't do what is you're told to do, people will try and kill you, right? So I knew people whose um, some acquaintances who were shot at, um, somebody whose house I used to go to every year for his Christmas party was shot, and the bullet barely missed his heart, but he survived luckily. So I was like, "ये क्या हो रहा है? Why is all this happening?" And so then I started to like get interested in. So I just like what usually happens to me is that I start to get curious about something or the other, like a
Hmm.
subject or a situation, and then I try and investigate it. And like at that point, all I knew about the underworld was what I had seen in movies, like all the smuggler movies way back in the 70s and 80s, and then the 80s gangster flicks. And so then I just started to, yeah, like I was saying, I started to think about this. And then, oh, I should say, you're going to have Hussein on
Yeah,
in a
yeah.
couple of days. Zedi and I go way back. We're like,
I've
he's
seen
one
you.
of my,
Yeah,
sorry.
because I was reading Zaidi's Class of '83 and Dongri to Dubai and Dawood's
Yeah,
Mentor, and your forward is there in like I think three of his books, and I was like,
yeah,
oh,
yeah,
and suddenly I made the connection in my head. I'm like, this suddenly makes a lot of sense with regard to a lot of the sort of specifics in sacred games.
yeah, 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 yeah. So I had met Hussein. So when I was starting to do Love and Longing, um, I, I needed like a source, right? So usually the way that I work is that I find somebody who leads me into that world, right? Whatever it is. So Anu was already working as a journalist, as a film journalist. And I said, listen, do you know anyone who works on crime? And she said, oh, there's this young fellow named Hussein Zaidi. He's really smart. You should meet him. So I called him, and like he must have been a little suspicious of me. We met at some place. I think it was in Juhu. Uh, and then he very generously started helping me. And so when I started to ask these questions in reference to this underworld stuff, I went back to Hussein. I said, like, Bhaiya, thodi aur madad kar do. I need some more. So he then, I mean, he's incredible. I mean, he's been doing that beat for decades now. He's fearless. He knows that world inside out. He knows the networks. And so then what happens is that I start like, Hussein will introduce me to one guy, say in the police, and then I'll meet that guy. And then I'll always ask, do you know anybody else who will be willing to talk to me? And then hopefully I get a couple more names. So it kind of spreads out. And then, so when I was starting to think about this, Sartaj was right there next to me, right? Like still weirdly alive, right? And so then he seemed like a natural kind of fit into what I was doing. And so then I just used him to followed him into that world, right? And that was interesting because, like, it was clear to me that he's a very small time cop who wants to remain small time, right? Um,
Hmm.
because he knows that, like, these, like in the series, he says it explicitly, a bade case, what did he say? Something like that. बड़े केस मेरे जैसे पुलिस वालों को खा जाता है.
Huh, huh.
Something like that. So then like this sort of contrast between this street cop who he's comfortable being a small time guy, suddenly thrust into this world where these huge games being played. That was a lot of fun to do and to explore.
And there's an excerpt that I read from Sig. I just want to read this one paragraph that I thought was like it made me laugh at the visualization of it. I think you're talking about how Sartaj is a dandy and he takes care of his appearance a lot and is really particular and meticulous. And this just made me laugh. Sartaj's grandfather's upturned mustaches had been acknowledged as the most magnificent in all of Punjab, and he had died in service as a daroga in a gun battle with Afghan smugglers near Peshawar. The legend went that when he was hit, he was eating a Dussehri mango. He sat down not far from a barbel bush, finished the mango, crossed his legs, held out his hand for a napkin that his senior most Havaldar was holding for him, wiped his fingers, dabbed at his mouth, twirled his mustache, and died. It's like that's such a funny visual of a guy like just. I mean, even though it's obviously legendary in their world or whatever, I just thought it was like a really funny bit to read. Kumar, obviously you have 10,000 questions. Why don't you start with your first?
Yeah, I had 998, and then two more I got from what Vikram was. Vikram sir, I don't know what to call you. Can we call you
Hey,
Vikram?
please call me Vikram here. I mean,
Vikram.
like, I don't know. In India, we have. I mean, I like the fact that we want to give respect, but it also feels to me really feudal. And at my uncle's stage, it makes me feel even more ancient than I am.
Yeah, I'll try and act cool. So Vikram, when he was talking about his first answer, I got two questions from there, but I'll start with the most obvious question and get it out of the way. Okay.
Yeah.
So I read Sacred Games, I think back in 2009, when I used to live in Delhi and I used to work in an IT company. And I bought this for some reason. I don't know how I bought it because I rarely buy hardcover books. And I bought this beautiful copy of Sacred Games with like a maroon cover with like golden print
Yeah.
of Sacred Games. And it was beautiful just to look at that. There's no razzmatazz, there's no jazzy cover with like any faces. It just said Sacred Games and Vikram Chandra. And it was a heavy book. Okay, and I used to carry it with my laptop to work on Delhi Metro, where you never get to see. You never get a seat and you don't get a chance to sit. So I used to stand in the corner and read this thick book. But my first memory of Sacred Games is when I started reading it, I immediately started visualizing it. And I was telling this to Sorabh. I immediately started visualizing a movie out of it for some reason. And that
Mm,
used to happen to me in school when I used to read Jeffrey Archer. Sometimes I used to just visualize that, okay, Cain and Abel, and there'll be this guy, that guy. I used to imagine Amir Khan and Shah Rukh Khan as Cain and Abel when I was reading Jeffrey Archer and all that. When I started reading Sacred Games, it's the first time I could legit, like I was telling Saurabh of how I imagined this Sardar cop to be Sunny Deol and this gangster to Shah Rukh Khan. And that was my first, like I'm talking about 2009. I was like, oh man, this has to be a thing someday. And Sacred Games was still not a mainstream book, so to speak, then. Obviously, after the web series came out and like a lot more people talk about it. So I'll get the most obvious question out of the way. As a purist, I always prefer book. But as someone who literally created Sacred Games and the universe, what are your thoughts on the adaptation? What are the things that you think that were better than the book that even you didn't imagine? And what are the things that you think that it could have done better? Only if you can answer it. I don't know.
yeah, yeah. No, that's right. So, I worked a little bit in the movie side on the other side, and I know how annoying it can be to filmmakers when writers try and control anything. Because the truth is that writers don't have any leverage at all in the movie industry, right? You're at the very bottom of the power structure. So I decided, and I also think that in order to do a good adaptation, to move from one medium to another, you have to make radical leaps, right? Because if you try and do a literal translation, it is very clumsy. It doesn't work, right? And this is there's a kind of cliche in translators of the literary sort is that if you do a literal translation, you leave all the poetry behind, right? And that becomes like really obvious, right? Like if you think of the expression in Hindi and Urdu, "वो मेरे कलेजे का टुकड़ा है," right? You try and translate that into English, it becomes "you're a piece of my liver." It's insane. It doesn't make any sense, right? So you always like you adapt according to context. So I was very comfortable with handing it over to the whole team, and I trusted them. I'd seen their work before. Um, and so then, there were like certain shocks along the way. Like when I saw the early version of the pilot, and then Parulkar comes on stage, and I hope I'm not giving away anything, but uh, in the book, Parulkar, who is a kind of he's a great player of this sort of political game, but he's kind of avuncular, right? He Sartaj trusts him and he looks up to him, and he's Sartaj's guide and mentor in the department. And suddenly, this Parulkar, the series Parulkar, was like shooting people. Yeah. And I was like, that was a jhatka, right? But I mean, once I withdrew from that a bit, I could see completely why it made sense, right? Because in a novel, you have the luxury of time and space and interiority, right? So for the first 100 odd pages of the book, Sartaj actually doesn't do much, right? Like you follow him kind of driving around the city. Uh, Gaitonde's narrative has these exciting, dramatic things happening, but in in a in a in a visual medium, especially in a TV series, you don't have the luxury to sort of have your character kind of wander around being thoughtful, right, and
Yeah.
remembering stuff. So you need immediate conflict. And what I thought the whole team for both seasons did in an astonishing way was like how they managed to make a universe that was itself, right? That it didn't try and replicate the book in a kind of identity, like a Xerox fashion. But they went off and did something that has its own life, and it works in its own on its own terms. And I couldn't have done it, right? Because I would have been too close to the material. And early on in these sort of discussions, when the thing was going to be set up, people are, they said, "Do you want to be part of the writing team?" I said, "No, no, man, leave me out of it. I'll go insane," right? Because that process is like so painful to writers because they want to protect what they've already imagined, right? And you can't do that. You cannot do that. So anyway, did I answer? Yeah. Was there another part two?
No, no, no.
Sorry, I got a part two to this, which is quite interesting that you mentioned. Like, I mean, the fact that you just basically trusted them to take over the book is very interesting to me because I mean, I think both Vikram Chandra and me are equally proficient writers and equally world famous in everything that we do. Like, I think I was trying to, and this question is going to sound really stupid coming from me specifically with regard to what I've been writing. I wrote a book called Underdelhi in 2014, which got published. In 2013, I wrote the book. And now is when we are basically pitching it to OTT platforms. And
Mhm.
I'm like, I wrote this book some 7 years back, and to get into the zone again, and you don't feel like the same things that you did back then. So one part of me is like, just let somebody, a junior writer like Salman Rushdie or something, take it over and let them, get an opportunity to work on my classic literature. But yeah, I mean, at what stage did you decide to just go like, this is I'm not going to be involved in the writing because you've written films before. So at what stage did you just go like, it's yours?
No, no, right at the start. I mean, so the way it worked out for this book is that you're talking about the length of time it takes for something to make it to the screen, if it does. So even before the book was published, um, there'd been so the studios and so forth, the filmmakers have scouts who look for promising material coming along, right? And so we had people reaching out to my agent saying, what were, are you interested in giving us an option and so forth. And one of the companies that was interested in this was Focus Features, which is an amazing company that made, especially at the time, they were doing amazing work. And so I had a meeting with one of the principals from Focus in Los Angeles over lunch, and he was very enthusiastic. And this was like, 2005, HBO was taking off with its series, but this whole sort of global Netflix thing, Amazon thing hadn't happened. And he was clear that they wanted to make a film out of it. And I was like, you guys are crazy. I don't know how you think you're going to do this. Um, uh, but okay, if you want to have a try at it. And they hired a very well-known, mm, very talented uh, British playwright who, poor guy, like he worked away at it for a couple of years, and then sort of various in the way that movie making sometimes happens, it didn't get done, right? So I just like said, okay, not going to happen. I wasn't depending on that in any way in my imagination anyway. And then years went by, and then another producer was in my agent's office in New York, and she expressed interest. And so then that started off this whole other cycle of of you know um, of pitching it to various channels like AMC and so forth now in the current context. But even back then, like way back in 2005, as soon as somebody said you want to make it, I was like, okay, take it. I don't want to know anything about it, right? Uh, I mean, the idea of being involved in a writer's room is, I think, to me, attractive at a distance, right? But when you get down into the trenches, it's a killer thing. I mean, I'm not built for the movie industry, right? Although I went to film school at Columbia after I did my BA, with the idea that I knew that it was very very hard to make a living as a writer, but the film is an industry, right? So you can get a job as an assistant to some assistant, right? And I lasted. It was a 2-year program, and I lasted for 1 year. Like, okay, I'm done. Right? Being around people all day is like really exhausting for me. This is my preferred environment. So I mean, I for various reasons, and I've seen writers who try to do that thing where they try and like get into the project, and a few of them I think have had come out of it like with a positive experience. Others have, it drives you insane, right? Because like I was saying, you have no leverage really, and then you're at the bottom of the pole, and then you're trying to cling to this thing. It'll get away from you, right?
I had a
KV,
related
I'll just do a
question.
quick super chat question. I'll just do two super chats and then please ask a question. Okay, just a couple of super chats coming in. Harshal Parekh, thanks a lot. Arunima Sharma, I'm finally watching this live and super excited about this one. Saurabh, you do great work. KV is emoji of hearts replacing eyes, which is an optician's nightmare. Happy to be here. Harshal Parekh, love your work, Vikram sir. Chiki Bum is too amazing. Prabjot Kaur says, can all of you recommend best of your three reads to us? And thanks, Saurabh, for doing these lives. Hey, thanks for watching. Um, okay, and somebody, Jinesh Udani just seems to have a comment rather than a question. Hi all, Vikram sir, are you a gardener or architect? Architect, three books. I think it's impossible for. Do you think it's possible to say three books? So let's just talk. Just list three books that we are reading right now. I think that might be easier than top three or whichever you prefer.
So
Let's start
are
with
we
yeah,
are
yeah,
each of us choosing three books?
yes sir.
Oh my God. Okay. So I guess I mean I'm reading a lot of nonfiction right now for various reasons. So and it's okay. This is going to be a kind of a weird one because it's like quite a scholarly book. It's called The Psychology of Religious Fundamentalism, right? Because I'm completely often baffled by like it happens everywhere in the world. You know, somebody will say something, a whole population will get infuriated about it. There will be threats thrown, there will be insults, and then somebody will inflict violence on somebody else. And I'm like, why? You know, if your creator has created this entire universe, right? The last time I looked, actually looked this up a couple of weeks back. There's supposedly 2 trillion galaxies in the universe, the last estimate, right? Our galaxy, according to various things, contains between 200 and 600 billion stars, right? So if I try and think of how many planets that implies, like my head starts to break, right? So if like the entire population of Earth started jumping up and down and hurling vile abuse at that creator, why would she bother, right, being offended? So anyways, so this is a lovely book by three psychologists of religion, and they're trying to understand what is the nature of fundamentalism, right? What is it that's so terrifying to people about somebody else having a different opinion, right? Looking at the world, and it's a very complex argument they make, but basically it's about, you know, any ideology gives you a way to understand the universe, and it gives you meaning in personal terms, right? And so if you think somebody is like shifting that ideology, your entire universe starts to fall apart, right? Externally and internally. And so then people react with rage to this. Okay, so that's a very downer question to. Prabhat was probably hoping for something fun to read. But the other book that I always tell people to read, it's like I try and read it once every few years, is one of my favorite writers is William Makepeace Thackeray, 19th century British author. He has a book called Vanity Fair, uh, which is like this. It's another fat um, tome, but it's beautiful. It's about this young woman named Becky Sharp who comes from sort of the lower side of British society, and she has no resources. She's an orphan, and she makes her way up through the culture, through the society, through cleverness, sex appeal, and her own intelligence and cleverness. It's funny and sharp and beautiful book. So I think everyone should read that.
Bala Sahib Thackeray was a fan, no? Of
Yes, yes,
Makepeace,
yes.
yeah.
Yeah.
That's where the they I think they changed the name from what is it? I've forgotten what the origins were, but they
Yeah,
changed it because of yeah.
yeah.
KV, let's see. I'm assuming you're reading about seven books at the same time. You have a face of a guy who reads seven books at the same time.
No, I'll just literally pick the three books I'm reading right now. Okay. Uh, the first book is What If by Randall
Yeah.
Munro.
Oh,
Uh,
yeah, yeah.
for those of you who don't know, like it's the creator of XKCD, and it just has fun questions like uh, you know, like is it possible to build a jetpack using downward firing machine guns? And like he just answers hypothetical questions like. So it's a fun book I'm reading. And then like last year I somehow realized that I hadn't read books in Hindi all my life.
Mm.
And Hindi is my like native language. I belong to the heartland, and we are native Hindi speakers. And somehow, so I started reading books in Hindi of late, and
Hmm.
that's why I'm reading this book by Gulzar. It's called Ravi Par, which is a collection of short stories written by Gulzar. And the third book I'm about to start reading. This very close friend of mine gifted it this morning. Like, so I'm like, this is a book by Manto called
Oh, yeah.
Moselle, and like collection of short stories again. And I've read Manto in bits and pieces here and there, but haven't read a book by him. So these are the three books I'm like reading right now.
So
Manto reminds me. I love Manto and his short stories, but I have to say my favorite writing of his are his writings about the film industry and Bombay, right? And those were translated into English as Stars Under Another Sky.
yeah.
Amazing. It's like funny, intimate. He shows you like the inner workings of the industry. It's brilliant writing. Everyone should read that.
I tried reading it and I was like, after a point, I was just like, why are you being so bitchy? Just gave up. I was really like into it. I'm like, oh, it's too bitchy. And I know that obviously a lot of it is an exaggeration and stuff like that. And you should never, Manto is like somebody who people greatly admire. So you can't even say anything without people going like, how can you say this? I'm like, yeah, I just didn't enjoy that particular book. I'm reading Tales of the Weird by Louis Theroux. I'm reading, which is, I love Louis Theroux. I've been trying to get him on the podcast. Um, and I'm reading, I'm on the, towards the middle of Love and Longing in Bombay. It was called Bombay back then. Now it's called Mumbai. And I'm also reading Hussain Zaid's Class of '83 and Dongri to Dubai and this thing for the Tuesday interview, and one more book also. I'm reading like 5 books at the same time because like and I realized that so Hussain Zaidi is like smuggling and death and murder, and then I'm like, let's read some Louis Theroux just to balance it out a little bit. So yeah. Okay, well, KV, what's your question? Yeah, let's sorry
Yeah.
for making you
Uh,
wait for so long. Huh?
Um, I forgot what, but I picked something from when we talked about Manto, and the one of the most interesting things in Vikram's career is this his contribution to Mission Kashmir, and this is where this next question comes from. Okay, now Mission Kashmir, if I look like it's the writing or whatever writing is by Vikram Chandra and Suketu Mehta. I mean, these are two like great writers, but they are working for a movie, which is not usual. It's like if you think of it's something similar to say Shiv Hari composing for Yashraj for a while. Like you have two like great musicians, but they're trying to do a movie. Like it's like Manto writing. It's like Ravi Shankar composing for Gandhi. I mean, I'm just saying that this is not what they're traditionally known for. So my question to Vikram is like how difficult. I know, like you mentioned about it when you started saying, like when you're writing for a movie, you're not really writing for yourself. It's like you're writing, it's like a brief, where you're writing and you're getting feedback, you're sending draft, and then somebody is suggesting changes. And it can be, I imagine it can be very stressful. It can also be it can limit your creativity in some sense. So in short, like what differences or what good things and bad things did you find working as a writer in a movie and writing for yourself?
Yeah. I mean, the first and really blatant difference is that like I was saying, in when you're writing fiction or any kind of prose, you have access to interiority, right? But what happens in theater and movies is everything has to be externalized, right? So the behavior has to represent the internal state of the characters. And if you can sort of do clumsily do voiceover to say, I was thinking as I walked down the street, but you do like more than like 2 minutes of that, people will start throwing shoes at the screen. It becomes very annoying. So for me as a writer, that is the most difficult thing, right? Just like to let go of what my tools are as a novelist or a fiction writer and to move to this other space. And the other thing is length, right? Like, so I worked on, my mother wrote the story for 1942, but I worked on that. I was actually up in the location shoot with Farah Khan and Sanjay Leela Bhansali, who were like the choreographers on that shoot. Um, so I used to work on scenes and then I would show them to Vidhu and he would like, yeah, bahut lamba hai yaar. Then he would take a pencil and draw like through like chunks of my dialogue, right? Because to me, you kind of float around in the atmosphere and like 2 minutes of screen time is insanely long, right? So getting used to that is very hard. And then there's the whole collaborative aspect of it, right? That on good days, the actors take something that you've done and make it into something brilliant, right? So then in Mission Kashmir, there's that scene where where Sanjay Dutt's character, his wife gets killed in a bomb blast, and then after the funeral, he goes back to the house, to the burnt up house. And in the screenplay, all it says is one line: Khan goes to the house, right? And he walks through it or something like that. If you watch that scene, what Sanju did in that is brilliant. It's all inside him, right? It comes from him and the way that the camera pays attention to him and makes the audience feel something is completely coming from this guy and his interpretation of those two bare lines on the thing, right? And as you're saying, when you're writing a screenplay, you're not making art, you're just making a blueprint for the art, right? Possibly the foundation for an art, because film is a medium about depth of field. It's about light, it's about framing, it's about sound and music. And so all you're doing is offering suggestions to the crew that this is what you should do, right? And then they execute something, and then that further gets shaped by the editors and so forth. So it's a very, like yeah, you have to realize that as a writer, as a screenplay writer, that what you're doing is very far from the final product. And then along the way, you know, things change all the time in filmmaking, right? Like suddenly you are doing an outdoor shoot and it starts raining, right?
Yeah.
You've got 150 people sitting on the set, and suddenly you have to decide to do something else. Otherwise, you're paying these guys for the next 3 days, right? Um,
Yeah.
I mean, on the 1942 A Love Story shoot, uh, people will remember Jackie's entrance scene, right? Uh, there's a scene where Manisha is, um, I think she's facing up the slope of the hill, and then she hears this bomb blast. She turns around and runs towards the thing where a bomb blast where his father just been killed, and a hand reaches in and grabs her and pulls her towards him, and then the camera reveals that it's Jackie, like big entrance, hero, I guess, that kind of thing. Um, and what happened on the set that day was that it had been the ground was wet, right, on this hillside, and the first take that Jackie did this, he slipped and like he fell and he had a really bad sprain on his ankle. And to the point where like the guy couldn't walk, you had to like get him and take him down the thing and take him to the military hospital. And that's another whole brilliant story. I mean, in brief, the military doctors looked at it and said like, "Isko to 2 hafte letna padega," right? And like again, you have dates for like 4 days. He's going to be laid up. What are you going to do with this crew? You'll never get your shot. So then one of the drivers who was local drivers who was driving us around said, "There's a guy, old man, who lives in such and such village, and he's a bone setter, right? So you should go to him." And so then Jackie gets taken to that guy in the middle of the night. That guy does his art, like it's like has this pot, uh, you know, jadi booty he puts in there, grinds it up, lapes it, lepa laga diya uske Jackie ke ankle par. And the next day, Jackie was not, I mean, he's not jumping around, but he's able to walk, right? And this guy saved the bloody shoot from this magical old man, right? By the way, also he refused to take money because he said that if I take money, my art will go away. That my Devi who gives me the ability to do this will be offended, right? Anyway, so that's
No,
I
so
get carried.
sorry, what did he take then? He didn't take money. What did he take? Like he's just like,
Nothing. Yes, no. He didn't take anything. Like this was his service thing, like his deal, right?
wow.
uh, to humanity, and so he wouldn't take money for doing this to the. And then I mean, anyway, so that's a like sidebar. Where were we? Sorry, deal with me. You're gonna have to tell these stories by the side. So I mean, so all that makes a difference. Then certain days actors make you feel like you want to shoot them, right? So like you've written something, you worked on it for 4 months. The star will walk on set. Yeah, I can't say this here. Come on,
Yeah,
it
yeah,
doesn't not working for me. Meanwhile, the lights going, or some other disaster is taking shape, and then you want to shoot yourself or the guy, right? Uh, so I mean, it's a rough, intensely creative, rough in business that makes industrial art and needs industrial amounts of money and effort, right? Filmmaking is not like sitting in this room for a couple of years on end and then leaving the room with something to show for it. Uh, it's like enormously complex and the people who thrive on it have to thrive on these challenges, right? On these changes, the constantly changing thing, on getting people to work for you. Yeah, yeah. So, like I was saying, not a business that I'm built for, right? At least in a direct way.
Industrial art is such an interesting description.
Yeah.
Uh, and yeah, that entire thing about a blueprint as a writer. I remember in Mission Kashmir, by the way, since you're talking about JackieShroff, I mean, that scene where he says, Mera bacha.
Yes.
I don't even remember what the context was, but just like Mera bacha. And like I'm obsessed with Jackie Shroff. I like he's one of the people I want to get because everybody has a story about Jackie Shroff, which is some fun story. Like this came organically, which is that Jackie Shroff sprains his ankle and then has to go to a whatever healer. It's just
Yeah, yeah.
Jackie thing. Yeah.
He's amazing. He's amazing. I mean, and again, it's like, when we first got to Bombay, we lived in a company apartment on Nepean Sea Road in Paradise
Right.
Apartment, right?
Right.
And you look down from, we were on the 7th floor, you look down and there's Pastry Palace right down
Yeah.
below. I don't know if Pastry Palace is still around, right?
I don't think
Uh,
so.
it's like a little outdoor cafe with, we used to get
No, no, no.
pastries and like some, rolls, kathi rolls and stuff like that. And every evening, Jackie and some of his buddies, Jaggu would show up and like sit outside and they would be surrounded by like lovely young things, right? And so like there was this like Jackie, Jaggu, right? Look at him. He's the only man that I knew back then who could pull off red trousers. So he was quite and they lived up on Teenbatti, right? So he used to come
Right.
down and hang out with people. And so I remember him like from way back then. And his Aisha used to go to, was the head girl at Villa Teresa, right? So of course she was dating the glamorous, beautiful Aisha was dating, had to be dating Jackie, right?
Yeah.
And so then suddenly, like, it made perfect sense first to see him in an ad. I can't remember which ad he got first. And then later he shows up as like in the background as one of the side villains in some movie. And then from there, his ascent has been amazing to watch. I love the guy. He's a
Yeah.
generous, like, warm person.
Okay, I'll just take a couple of super chats. Actually, the first one is right up your alley. First of all, Bose Baba, thanks a lot, Bose Baba. You're a hero, man. Very nice of you. Great job, Sorabh. Great, good panel, and also this is for KV Random Chicky Bum. Always, man. KV is a hero. Inesh Udani says the last super chat was a question: does Vikram sir outline his fiction first, or does he continue with the basic idea slash theme and goes about it? I mean, if you want to answer that,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah. No,
yeah.
I never have the least kind of plan, right? So, I mean, all I have often at the beginning is maybe a character and then a vague sense of place, right, and atmosphere. And then the thing will keep coming back to me. So when I started thinking about Sacred Games, I knew I wanted to do crime and something. So I knew who Sartaj was, right? And this scene kept coming back to me that Sartaj is outside a weird bunker-like house in the suburbs in Kailashwara, and he's talking to over the intercom to a gangster who's barricaded himself inside. And I had no idea who the gangster was. I don't know why the gangster was in there, right? Just that these two guys were having a talk. And so then what I do is I start like sort of exploring, like asking these questions. Why is the gangster in there? Who is he? What's his backstory? And then once I start thinking about that, then I can start working up, the story reveals itself to me, right? Rather than me making the story, as it were. And this actually results in major frustration at times because, like, for the first 4, 5, 7 drafts, I have no idea what I'm doing, right? And I don't even know, like, what am I moving towards? Is this thing any good? Does it have any kind of like valuable virtue in it? And then you kind of grope yourself along in the dark, and then at some point you get this shift where then I start to see the shape of it and like what the story is about, and then I can come back and start rebuilding it. Uh, and I think a lot of writers work like this, especially those who work in quote unquote literary fiction, right? Where you move through the characters towards a story. Um, if you do more kind of, I guess, to put it a little unkindly, formulaic fiction, right? If you're writing thrillers, um, then I think sometimes you have the opportunity to know from before what the structure is, right? You know that, okay, I don't know, gang of criminals are going to do a heist in a bank, right? And we're going to follow the heist, right? So then you have a beginning, middle, and end already in your head, right? The group comes together, they suss out the bank, they make a plan, bang, 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 heist happens, success or defeat, right? But I think for most of the work, I've never been able to work like that. And I actually get jealous of people who are able to do that because, like, I think that must be a more sane version of what I do, right? Like, you have the framework and then you try and construct something. But I've tried it. I'm a miserable failure at doing it that way.
Right. Yeah, it's the writing. I mean, I think the writing techniques and how. I mean, I think the question to ask you would also be how long it took to write. As you said, you release a book every not 10 years, but every about 5 years or something like that.
No,
Isn't it?
it's average is about 10, right?
Okay, that's a lot.
I've only published 4 books in my entire life. That's what I think it works out to. I mean, some Love and Longing came out. Red Earth and Pouring Rain was 95. Love and Longing was 97. But
Right.
then there was a long gap towards, Sacred Games 2006.
156.
Five, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, just one last super chat, and then I think KV is itching to ask a question. Dhyanesh Y says, never thought I would watch anything live other than cricket match. That's pretty funny. Thanks for live stream, Sorabh and KV, and Rahul Subramaniam. I don't know why Rahul Subramaniam is getting credit for not even being on the stream. This is like, what is this? He's following you, the ghost of Rahul. He's not even dead, and his ghost is following you on this thing. By the way, I forgot to mention that it was called Bombay back then. Now it's called Mumbai. I apologize to everybody concerned. KV, what's your question? You have a question
Yeah.
for sure.
Okay. I just want to. Okay. I'll change track a bit because not just Saurabh mentioned him in the beginning as a junior writer, but also he's my favorite writer. If I had to pick one, Salman Rushdie. So when I look at say satanic verses, and that's also sort of about religion, Bombay, Mumbai, Bollywood, and also like Rushdie came into the scene in early 80s, and then he was probably the biggest Indian name in the literary world. And that's when you started writing in 90s, etc. So my question is, was Rushdie an influence into how you became a writer or when you were writing? And if not Rushdie, who were the writers who like influenced you as a writer, like your influences?
Yeah, yeah. No, Salman was definitely big. I mean, earlier on, uh, I mean, Hindi, Prem Chand, right? That whole generation of the 50s and 60s writers, um, Bhisham Sani and all of those. I used to read those. My mother, before she started writing film, used to write stories for Dharmyog and so forth. So that sort of reading and discussion was always present in my head. And then, that Ruskin Bond, R.K. Narayan, that sort of those group of writers were extraordinary, right? I loved especially R.K. Narayan's work. But what happens when Midnight Children is published in 1984 is that it was a revelation to a lot of us that we could use English in a literary way, in the way that we actually used it on the streets and in our homes, right? So before that, like when Indians would try and write fiction in English, it would be kind of what's the word? I mean, we kind of stiff. It would be formal, right? And there was none of that slang usage. You translated all the yars and the whatever, and you made it kind of a flat English surface, right? A Queen's English kind of surface. And what Salman did was explosive in the sense that suddenly the rhythms of what we actually, how we spoke and how we lived in this multilingual universe in India, that suddenly came alive on the page. Right. And it was brilliant. I mean, I remember I was in California as an undergrad reading that book, and like I was like, this guy, like he's doing something that I have never seen done before, right? At least in this literary. I have to say that the other arena where English was used in this interesting way was in Stardust magazine. You guys are probably too young to remember Nita's
No, no,
Natter. Right? Sorry, go ahead.
No, we remember Stardust, and I vaguely remember some. Anita's Natter was this lady who used to do that gossip thing about what's happening around. Yeah, I vaguely remember this. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So at the beginning of every issue, the first like I don't know 7-8 pages would be Nita's natter, right? And they would all these like gossip items, right? Some of them would be blind items, but like Rajesh Khanna was seen on Carter Road, holding so and so's hand, that kind of thing. But like there, like Hindi and English mixed together, Marathi would pop in from time to time, and so it was this kind of khichdi, which was very interesting. But you'd only seen it like in what was considered a kind of probably the best filmy magazine, but still it's a filmy magazine, right? And so suddenly that kind of language was also being used in the literary world, and so I thought it was brilliant. Uh, and I think his shadow, in a sense, the influence of his writing is huge. And also there was a kind of a lot of people thought he cast a really big shadow, right? Because for years after that, after Midnight's Children, every time an Indian writer published something or you sent something off to an agent, you always being like, why isn't it more like Salman Rushdie? you know, are you doing something similar? Then all of that kind of stuff. And then also, what really worked for me because of and you can see this, I did it especially in Red House and Pouring Rain, is the use of what in the literary world is called magic realism, right? So that you have kind of like the real in a very gritty present kind of way. So it's really Kemp's Corner that he's talking about, but flowers can rain down from the sky in Kemp's Corner, right? So there's this fantasy mixed with reality, which I think is familiar to all of us in South Asia, right? Like Mahabharata, Ramayana. There's a kind of very, very sort of gritty understanding of what life is, but at the same time, fantastic things can happen, right? So that really resonated with me. I instantly loved that because my imagination works like that in many ways.
It's so interesting how you mentioned Salman Rushdie and Stardust as two of your writing inspirations.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, Shobha Dey, like she was doing some really interesting stuff, really creative stuff in Stardust as an editor at the time.
Right. Oh, I didn't know. I didn't know she was the editor.
Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Okay, I have a couple of questions. I definitely want to talk about season 2 of Sacred Games, because I the story went that I was doing a show called Sorabh Reviews Anything, where we were doing reviews, and in my head I was like, the great idea would be that if I can get a preview show from Netflix, then I will beat everybody to the punch and do a review of season 2. So Netflix was like, hey, we'll let you watch the first 3 episodes of season 2. I'm like, yeah, that's good enough. And I watched the first 3 episodes, which were genuinely good, right? I think season 2 gets panned a lot. And I have some theories on, like, I don't know, as a writer or as a creator, the most dismissive thing you can tell somebody is that this was not good. You know what I'm saying? As opposed to why you thought it wasn't. And I actually saw Sacred Games season 2. I finished literally the last episode last night because I'd watched the first 3 and then watched 2. And I realized that in season 3, in season 2, the problem was that the first 3 episodes were generally great. Then there was about 2 or 3 episodes which were not at all. And then there were 2 episodes which were actually great again. So it was that there was just a chunk in the middle which people have really derailed. I'm curious to know what you thought of it and if you have any opinions about it. And yeah.
No, I mean, absolutely. Everyone should. I thought it was brilliant, right? I mean, the entire season as a piece was what it did was it took some of the setups from the first season and then executed them in a way that was surprising, right? Um, and I think, I mean, as far as like sort of public reception goes, I knew this was going to happen, right? Because what happens the first season is you're fairly I don't want to say standard, but it's a familiar kind of structure of the the gangster's rise to power, right? And
Right.
his triumphs against adversity, his intrigues, and meanwhile there's a parallel story of the cop trying to figure out what's going on. And then what happens in season 2 is that the gangster is shown to be completely powerless, right? So this fantasy figure upon whom we projected all these these sort of visions of strength and, kind of dark glamour, um, suddenly comes out to be like he loses his, what is his word, his virility in a sense in the second one, in the second season, which is also what happens to him in the book, right? Like he makes this sort of leap towards greatness and finds that greatness isn't quite what it cracked up to be, right? And he gets played completely. And so that sort of movement away from the thriller structures of the first season to what becomes kind of an exploration of character rather than a thriller, I think it sort of left people, what's the word? Um, yeah, not knowing what to expect, right? Like they expected one thing and they were given another. So I think it worked. I mean, and then the other interesting thing is that a friend of mine pointed out to me that Netflix almost never releases numbers, right?
Right.
They never tell you anything about which show got the most viewers, which show didn't get viewers, and so forth. Even internally, right? They never. That's one of their secret sauces, right? They will not tell you whether 5 people watch a show or 50 million, right? But I think at the end of July. On Twitter or someplace, they said they had a list of the 10 top shows of that day, and Sacred Games was one of them.
Yeah.
Right. And so this is what, 8, 9, even more months after the release of season 2. Right. So there's a kind of like sort of public arena in which there's this sense of, whatever opinions people have. And then there's the actual sort of the life that a piece of art has, right? Which can be two quite different things. And I mean, I hope I don't sound defensive, but I'm very proud of the way that they did it. And the other thing I should point out is that the New York Times, I think earlier this year, published their list. It's called something like the 30 best international shows of the decade, and Sacred Games was one of them. Right. So in terms of reception, whether you want to look at it in terms of popularity, number stakes, or if you want to look at it in terms of critical reception, if one should pay attention to that, I think it's done quite well for itself on both counts.
Oh no, no. I mean, again, what I was trying to explore what it was, and I don't know, KV, you can help me out here. Um, I just think that the a lot of the ashram sequences sounded so like almost as you said, there was almost some magical realism to it,
Yeah,
which
yeah,
sort of which took it away a little bit. But I'm still completely riveted by the show. I thought that the conclusion of season 2 was interesting. I still love the show, by the way. Second game is still, and I'm not just saying that. And I know that on the comments they'll be like, "Arey teri to phat gayi uske baad mein." I'm just saying that I thought that the first 3 episodes were genuinely fun. The first three, the middle three were okay, but I still liked how it ended up. I'm definitely excited about season 3. But yeah, KV, what do you think?
About Sacred Games.
Yes, sir. The TV show, the book, unanimously we love, and I
Book.
think again, as Vikram pointed out, it's that the creativity takes its own sort of thing, and you can't constantly be encumbered by what people are thinking about your product. Otherwise, then you would not be able to make 95% of the things that you make. So yeah, I was curious.
Yeah, I absolutely loved season 1. I mean, obviously, I was disappointed some parts because it's very cliched book better than whatever that thing. Season 2, I was slightly disappointed with a few things. I mean, that's a separate long discussion, I guess. But some
Right.
things just didn't fit into, like, I found some of the things were force fed or just trying to force a narrative and trying to show certain personalities and events from Indian history. It became like in the middle, and in the end also I was little disappointed. I mean,
yeah.
comparatively, season 1 I liked. Yeah, yeah.
Now people are comments have started. Pandering, laugh my ass off has started. I'm not pandering. I think you know what? I think as I get older and the more things you make, you understand I think Roger Ebert once said that I review movies from the POV of what the director was intending versus what I expected. which is a completely different. It changes your perception with regard to what you're watching. Again, I still thought, as I said, Sacred Game season 2. I'm still gonna watch season 3. There is a season 3, right?
The writer is the last one to know. So therefore, yeah. And if I knew, I couldn't tell you because they would send Netflix would send its ninjas after me.
By the way, I was while reading Love and Longing in Bombay. It was called Bombay back then. Now it's called. There's something that struck me, and I'm curious what you think about this, which is that Sartaj Singh, that detective. Uh, it's like one of my favorite indulgences is Lee Child. I love Lee Child. I've
Yeah,
read all the 17 books I've read, and I'm like, no matter, I'm invested in this character. And that's the same case with Sacred Games, where I'm like, I'm invested in Sartaj Singh for whatever he does. So I'm curious if you ever thought about doing like a sequence of books, or I mean, or it's as you said that you just spend so much time with it that you're like, I can't, I'm done.
yeah. No, not no, no. Actually, I think Sartaj and I are like pretty much finished, unless he has like further film, TV life, right? Which I can watch from a distance, right? Yeah, no, I mean, there's a point at which you've done your work with the character and the location. I mean, the milieu, and then you don't want to do it anymore.
Right.
What is funny about, like, I don't know what, I didn't quite catch what you said in the comments. That another thing that like always strikes me as baffling is like why people get so upset about other people's aesthetic opinions, right?
Hmm.
Like if some guy somewhere on the other side of the world doesn't like what you like, or the other way around, why do you get so angry, right? It's like, if you like chocolate ice cream and I like mango, like, we don't have to assassinate each other over the difference of opinion. I'm completely baffled by it. Like, and I mean, the other thing is that um, like I was saying, the reception of art in the long term is very, very unpredictable. Like
Hmm.
what survives and what, you know, things that win Oscars today or the Booker Prize sometimes don't turn out to be, that Iftikhar's line, lambi race ka ghoda,
Yeah.
right? And the other way around, right? The Great Gatsby, which is one of my favorite books ever.
Yeah.
When it was published, it was universally panned. Everyone
Yeah.
hated it, and poor Fitzgerald died thinking he was a failure, right? And the
Yeah.
critics, like if you go back and read the reviews, is like, this guy has drunk himself into writerly oblivion. So the poor guy, right? And then like the book gets rediscovered a decade or 2 decades later, and then suddenly people start to see its virtue. It's astonishing when you think about it. I mean, I read that book and then I look at the reviews and I'm like, what were you people thinking, right? And then it happens the other way around as well, right? So like
Yeah.
somebody gets all the accolades and so on, and then 5-10 years later you start saying, oh, that was pretty bad. That wasn't what I thought it was. So anyway, I mean, I'm sidetracking the conversation, but yeah, this kind of fundamentalism of literary opinion is something else that is kind of strange.
But so at least as a writer, you get that like once every few weeks. As comedians, we get that like daily. It's like
Yeah,
you say anything. Like yesterday, some guy got really angry with me. He's like, "Hey, why are you getting these half-baked Mumbai comedians?" I'm like, then I really like a lot of them, and just because you're from a city, he's like, no, my Delhi comedians are best, and even Zakir Khan said the same. No, he didn't. You're just you're hearing what you want to hear for someone. So yeah, I think there is a lot of that. KV, let's
Next
have some
question.
questions, and then I have two questions.
My question is again from something that Vikram said when in the outset of this session, where his connection or like his upbringing around our film industry in some sense, in the
Yeah,
sense like your mom, like she wrote all the way back in 82 when Prem Rog came to, I think 92 when Chandni came, like late 80s, early 90s, and then I got to a love story. And Tanuja Chandra, she gave us Sangharsh and Karib Karib Single, and Puma Chopra, Vidu Chopra. So question comes from there. My question is, having grown up in this environment of movies, and then even as an adult, like most of your relatives and friends and your ecosystem is filmy in some sense.
Yeah.
And even your work, when I read like Sacred Games, there's something filmy about it, for lack of a
Yeah.
better word, where I can visualize what's happening. I can see heroes and villains and antagonists, protagonists. Did that environment shape how you wrote, or how much of an impact on you as a writer was from this ecosystem? I know obviously our
Mhm.
life affects our writing,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
but then how much did it affect yours as like the world of the films as a writer?
I mean, hugely so, right? Like, so, um, I mean, I do think really visually while I write, right? Like I was saying that when I start, like literally, I have this like high angle wide shot, right, of Sartaj standing outside this bunker like house, right? And I can see it's a hot afternoon, and like he's like, what the hell's going on, right? And then like when I as I keep writing, I imagine visually in terms of sound, smell, taste, all of that like is a three-dimensional thing, and then my job is to get it down on paper, right? Which is what I think people then correctly understand as it being a visual kind of writing, right? And this was present all the way back in my first book, Red Earth, and I think continues to this day. Um, but then also, like in terms of cultural ethos, I think the popular Indian cinema comes from a very ancient tradition of Indian drama, right? So both in the high sense and in the low sense, right? So there's the sort of Natya Shastra, and then all the Indian tradition of drama, which uses song and dance as part of the dramatic apparatus, right? It's very, very present in there. And then we have street theater, right? And we come down, let's say, speaking only of the Bombay industry, the first time that a talkie is made in India, which is Alamara, it has like what, 7, 8 songs in it, right?
13
So,
songs
so
for
13 songs, yeah. So,
more than
so like as soon as you execute a visual medium, talking medium in India, you do song and dance in it, right? And it's very robust, right? And it's actually very, very strong. And I find it when it's done well, it's delightful, right? It's soars, in terms of emotion and its profundity. I was listening to a podcast in which they were talking about Hakikat, right? Chetan
Mhm.
Anand's movies
Yeah,
in the
yeah.
light of all the stuff that's happening with China right now. And like, I remember being in Houston and showing clips from that to a bunch of my American friends. It's like a war movie with songs in it makes no sense, right, to them, right? Like it's a gritty war film. Like people are actually dying, right? And it doesn't glorify war in any way, that film. And then suddenly the soldiers break out in song, right? So, but I think the wonder of this tradition is that it manages to do both, right? And I guess that's also why I'm very strongly attracted to magic realism, right? Because there's the same sort of idea of way of using different techniques. Um, so for all of these, and then if you're going to write about the Indian landscape, um, then I don't understand how you would do that without dealing with the influence of cinema, right? With the everyday reaction of people, right? I mean, if you're writing about the United States, in some sense, somewhere along the way, you have to deal with rock and roll, right? Because it's the background music to everyone's lives here, right? And as a writer, you can utilize that very handily, right? You have somebody listening to the Doors or being nostalgic about the Doors, then you know something about the person who's the character, right? And in our context, filmy music does exactly the same job, right? It's part of the texture of everyday lived texture. And somebody can sing a song and it'll take me back to a specific moment, a year
Right.
in my life. So I I I guess, yeah. So for all, and then in Sacred Games, it became really fun to do this, right? Because it's a book set in a city which is obsessed with movies, right? And like uh, it's like an industry town in some sense, right? So even if you're very far from the glamour, the supposed glamour of the industry, you always have the chance of like seeing, I don't know, Dharmender outside a restaurant or something, right? And it gives you this little flash of connection. And so it's part of the mythology of the city. So to write a big book about set in Bombay, you necessarily have to deal with all of these elements. And not necessarily. For me, it was such great fun. right? Like making a soundtrack in my head for the entire book.
By the way, somebody has.
Just want to add one line of, because I
Please,
can't
please.
but talk about Hakikat because Vikram talked about it. And now Hakikat is genuinely a unique war movie in the sense that the movie's climax is a song, you know. The
Yeah,
movie ends with Kar Chale Hum Fida Jano Tan Sathiyo, which of course is one of the best songs ever written. Mohammed Rafi, Kafi Azmi, Chitran.
yeah,
It's beautiful. And like Vikram said, it does not glorify war because and soldiers are dead. And what I've heard from like people from that era is that people watching Hakikat in theater, they could not leave. They were mesmerized.
yeah, yeah,
Everyone got emotional. Like it's about a war that we've lost, and
yeah,
still there's like people are just watching, and there's Mohammed Rafi in the background going Kar Chale Hum Fida. There are dead soldiers. It's a beautiful. It's very poignant, and I mean
yeah,
I
yeah,
get goosebumps. Hakikat.
yeah, yeah.
It's
It's an
very unique
extraordinary.
war.
Yeah, yeah, for many reasons. Yeah.
Yeah.
I've never seen it. By the way, there's somebody in the comments, Swami Viveka Munudan, who says season 2 is surely going to kill at the enemies. Just wait. So there you go. I mean, that'll be great. Abhijit
But
P
Emmy,
asks, can we? Sorry, go ahead. Sorry.
no, I was just gonna say Emmys, Hindi foreign, you can't get it for. Those are the international Emmys that you get. The big Emmys are not. We are not eligible for those. It's a
Why?
very like they have some rule about like language, this, that, and the other. So the international Emmys is the sort of like the arena in which um, uh, other language. I think that is it. But I know for certain that any show that is not made in the English language or something, we aren't eligible for the big Emmys.
Oh, I didn't
Yeah,
know
yeah.
that. That's. I mean, yeah, I guess it makes sense. I mean, it's about their industry. I mean, it's
Yeah,
so why would they? Can we get Hussein Zaidi on the podcast? Says Abhijit P. Hussein Zaidi is coming on Tuesday with Sumaira Sheikh. So don't worry about that. He's coming literally right now. Okay. I had a question. I wanted to know about. There's been a lot of talk in India right now about censoring the internet, and
Mm.
it was prompted by Sacred Games and Mirzapur and all that kind of stuff. And I mean, some of it I found absurd because like getting offended by a Netflix show for which you need to get a membership, and then it clearly says that it's for mature audiences only, and then you're like offended by it. It's like that old thing of you're basically walking 300 kilometers and peering over your neighbor's house and say, hey, why are you having sex?
Yeah.
So what do you think about the whole censoring thing right now, which is going on?
It's a knee-jerk response, and it's. I mean, how exactly? Okay, so maybe you'll get Indian um, people who are making content within India. You can restrict what they're doing, right?
Hmm.
But it's not like you can censor the entire internet, right? Um,
Yeah.
and people are going to find the content that they want to watch. So it's essentially, I think, it's a kind of knee-jerk move born out of fear, and it's inevitably going to fail in some sense or the other, right? And the paradox to me is that this is the same. I was I remember seeing some figures a while back, like on Pornhub, India is the like second or third most enthusiastic nation of watchers, right? So
Yeah.
you're trying to do something that, given the nature of the internet now, is physically impossible, right? Unless you're going to set up a Chinese-like system of some internet Great Wall, right? You can't control what people are watching and what they're going to watch and what they're not going to watch. Maybe politically inside the country, inside the nation state borders, you will make it harder and harder for people to say things that you don't like being said, right? Uh, and that's a political game. It's not a game in any sense that is rooted in, I don't know. I just find it completely disingenuous. Right?
But they're capable of doing it. There's
Yeah,
another question
no,
that I had, which yeah, please go ahead. Yeah.
I know they will, right? And
Hmm.
it's like, I mean, I think you can, in this sort of um, era of supercharged nationalism fueled by social media, anger gets like, multiplied. the political gains of doing this kind of thing are too large to actually not engage in this, right?
Right.
And so I think there's going to be very serious attempts to will be made, and they'll probably get executed.
I mean, like I understand sometimes. Like I was watching the match recently with my kids, and my kids, I'm trying to get them into cricket because I'm like, hey, this is your father's religion, so please participate. And in the middle, there was a there was an ad that showed up for some TV show, and the guy says Mother Chod. And I'm like,
What?
yeah, I was watching. I'm like, dude, it's a cricket match. How are you putting an ad which has like, so in that particular zone, I'm like, obviously that's not okay. Right. And
Right.
it's, I won't name the channel or whatever, but there's only one place where matches are happening right now. So it's pretty easy to understand which is channel. And I love the channel's programming, but I'm like, dude, don't put an ad in the middle with like kids and old people and all that who would be offended. You you obviously have to say that, hey, this is for mature audiences only, and then
Yeah.
participate and all that stuff. But don't like. So that I was a little disturbed by. And then you know what, the fun part was that I was watching it and I was fortunately in front of my laptop while watching it, and he said "ma," and I just like paused it at the exact time. So it's like, what happened? So yeah,
No, I
can
mean,
you have,
yeah.
yeah,
I wouldn't. I'm not suggesting like a complete free for all, right? Like,
right, obviously,
yeah. I mean, and sort of, what content should get produced, and just I'm saying that the reasons behind this particular, we get offended by this, so therefore it should be banned and controlled.
Hmm.
That is kind of, it seems to be transparently kind of, you know, motivated out of fear and like political gain, right?
I don't know why I'm mentioning this, but India has some really weird porn habits. Uh, I don't know who the guy was. Somebody was doing some research on figuring out porn habits, and apparently, the most one of the top 5 or 7 most watched porn videos in India is breastfeeding,
Wow.
which is just. And I was like, I mean, I don't personally, I've never watched porn in my life because I'm very cultured and nice, but a friend of mine sent me a video, and I was like, this is who is watching this and getting turned on? This is really creepy. So yeah. Anyway, I just thought I'll mention that and completely derail this conversation for absolutely no
Yeah,
reason, and leave you guys with a visual image of that in your head for whatever reason. KV, you have a question. Please go ahead.
yeah. So I had a question which can take an hour, so I'll just try and narrow it down. And I want to talk about, like, you're not just a film fan, Vikram, but you've written for film, you've grown around film. So I want to focus on Bollywood, like Hindi cinema for a while. And you've seen it evolve from 80s to 90s to 2000 to now. Now we have web content and like Amazon Prime, Netflix, and all that. But that discussion will take forever. So I just want to talk about a subgenre of Hindi movies, which is crime. Okay.
Mm,
And now, like, and I'm not saying this because you're associated
yeah,
with Vidhu Vinod Chopra. Parinda, for example, was a milestone in
yeah,
how
yeah,
Hindi movies picked up. And then 9 years later, Satya came. And then
yeah,
there was a string of good Ram Gopal Verma movies for a while, from Satya to Company to Sarkar. And then now we have web is inundated with crime-based shows,
yeah,
whether
yeah,
Sacred Game for Heartland Crime or like Wasepur came a few years back and Mirzapur and all that. How
yeah.
do you think, as a writer and as an ardent, like someone who has been an integral part in some sense of this industry, how do you think we've portrayed crime over, say, the last 3 decades, going from 80s to 90s to, because crime in, say, 70s and 80s were very different, like you mentioned earlier. It was about smuggler who Mud Island pe jetty aane wala hai, and then some do note aise bachana hai, then there's Ajit and there's Madan Puri, there's
Yeah,
very different kind of a criminal setup with Sara Share Mujhe Lion ke naam se janta hai and all that. And then it started getting real and gritty and like on shot, on location shoot and blah blah blah. How do you think crime has evolved? Portrayal of crime has evolved in on screen in India.
no, I mean, I think the trend that you're pointing to I mean, yeah, of course, that the kind of, something happens in the society, and then artists, not just filmmakers, but writers and all other kinds of people feel a need to address that, right? And then the form of how they address it will change according to what they're seeing, right? And also there's a certain one of the reasons why people weren't making really gritty cinema about crime in the 70s and 80s was that the censor board would come down on top of your head, right? So I think a lot of your people in the audience will know that the originally Sholay had a different ending, right?
Yeah.
Where the Thakur kills Gabbar Singh,
But,
right? And it's if you can find it floating around on YouTube somewhere, you should go watch it if you haven't seen it. It's an end that works so much better. But then the censor board comes and says, no, we can't have that. The cops have to show up and drag him off to prison, right? So then Ramesh Sippy has to go out and reshoot that whole damn thing, right? So yeah.
That suddenly makes sense, because I was like, when that happened, I was like, why is he suddenly calling the cops? He's in the middle of this rage, which is like decades old, and suddenly he's like, police ko phone kar raha hai." What the fuck is that?
Yeah, no, the police actually just shows up, right? And it's like,
the cop comes out of nowhere. It's like, ठाकुर साहब, आपके साथ कुछ भी हुआ, लेकिन आप भी तो एक जमाने में पुलिस ऑफिसर थे, और इस देश का कानून की आपने भी इज्जत की है इतने साल. You're like, okay, I've been living for the last so many years without hands, trying to kill this fucker. I hired 2 goons, so no one believed in me. I got them from like Bombay and Bhopal to here in Ramgarh, shooting in Tumkur near Bangalore. Working with this debutant, Hamza Khan. Oh, you now I have to kill him. I was really pissed. Like,
yeah. Right. So I think what happens then is that with Parinda, I mean, Vidhu did something really brilliant, right? And I mean, the story behind also that is that I met him just after Parinda had been released. I think it was a year after, and the reason that we met up in New York, we were introduced. I can't remember how exactly we met up, but then I came to Bombay to work with him on a script, right? Like an undefined script. As in Vidhu, he's always doing this. Chal yaar aa jate hain, aaja baith ke thoda story likhte hain, right? So and he in his early life, he had this incredible life. He came to the Film Institute, which he couldn't afford, so his brother Veer paid for most of his schooling there, and he won a bloody Oscar with his short, the documentary that he made as his graduation film at the institute. And then he makes 2 small, brilliant films, right? And he tells this story still with horror that, you make this film that you think is really good. And I think those early 2 films are really good. But then you're waiting for the distributor to call you and nobody's coming, right? Khamosh, right? And so that is like terrifying, right? And especially in the film industry, right? Because you borrowed money to make this damn thing and you can't like make the money back. So then I think Parinda for him was like a very canny choice, right? How am I going to tell the story that I want to tell using the tropes that are familiar? So it's like the gangster movie with songs, right? It's very like consciously arranged, right? And in a way that you deploy the best of both forms, right? And so that's why it finds like critical success and it becomes a cult kind of film, right? Because it breaks out of that box of art cinema, right? And manages to mean other things to other people. So also then in that he's able to show, corrupt policemen, he's doing something else. The physicality of it is different. Then Ramu takes that with Satya and takes it one step further, right? So the engagement with the reality of crime and what the crime represents changes with the times, and also changes with the sort of scope of what you're able to do, right? And so then like a Patal Lok now, or Mirzapur is able to do things that wouldn't have been available in terms of like the freedom of what craft or how you want to represent it, but also in terms of just industrial art, right? So money, right? How are you going to make Sacred Games with a television budget that was possible in India before Netflix and Amazon came in, right? Impossible. You couldn't have done it, right? So these factors then play into the representation that actually ends up then on the screens, right? Various things happening at the same time, right? And then also like once you're liberated from the clutch of censorship, as it were, right? You are then able to do things on the screen that you wouldn't have been able to do 2 or 3 years ago even. And I mean, I think it's really interesting. I mean, I'm really far behind on my reading and TV viewing. I've had this like weird other life co-founded a software startup, which was a kind of
Yeah.
crazy thing to do, but I've been doing it. But I've watched some of the new stuff and really liked it, loved it. And not just I mean, crime, we think of policemen and we think of gangsters and stuff like that, but like Bulbul, for instance, right? Um, that what that film does in terms of like you know crimes against women, the oppression of women, you can think of that also as a crime story, right? There's a like unsolved puzzle at the heart of it, what happens in it, and then crime in a sort of sense other than what was that movie that Nawaz just did? It was written by Smita Singh. I'm so horrible at names. Raat Ke Liye,
Right.
right?
Oh,
One
yeah.
just came right now. Yeah.
That just came right now. So there you're using a murder mystery to explore the kind of the contours of a certain culture, right?
Yeah.
In terms of like how it works, the landscape of that part of Uttar Pradesh, um, the relationship between the poor and the rich, and I really love that kind of storytelling as well, right? So when we talk about crime, often I think we confine it to one kind of filmmaking in general. The other thing actually that I've been thinking, um, I've been feeling more and more as more and more of these recent years is that crime is too dominated by men, and I mean that in the way of being written by men, being directed by men, right? Which ends up, I think, in a kind of sameness of representation. Like a lot of the series and the movies are interested in the same kind of stuff, right? The heroic gangster then becomes like a trope that is like finally is going to become really boring. Right? It already actually bores me, right? And has bored me for a long time, which is why Guy Tonde, from the heights of his success, has to come down the cliff on the other side. The aging gangster, right? Uh, but I would love to see, somebody like Meghna Gulzar, Smita writing Raat Akeli Hai, all of these people doing brilliant work if they were given more of a chance to deal with this rich soil of uh, crime in whatever sense you want to think about it.
that but I mean, I think one of the things that happens in all your books, including Sacred Games and even the Sacred Games TV show, is the ambitious women theme, right? Which is I mean, what is that test, the Bechdel test, which is about yeah, and that is at least like defied repeatedly, and I think it's something that it needs to be defied repeatedly. Even in Love and Longing in Bombay, it was called back then, now Mumbai. There is that whole thing about both those ladies who are in South Mumbai, South Mumbai, and they they're both ambitious in their own, and I was like, this is great. That was a great story, by the way. I was totally riveted by that story, because it's so, you've seen variations of it happen without knowing what the background is. Like
Yeah.
even her house help is ambitious in her own way, and I was like, that's great. So just a couple of this is the question which I think I was saving for, because you mentioned coding. Sai Krishna, how did you get into coding? Has coding affected your writing? Is coding more creatively satisfying or writing? And that's when you have coded a new software to replace writers and destroy your own livelihood.
No, 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 no. I mean that if we could have created that kind of super intelligence, we'd be richer than Bill Gates already. Uh, no, I mean, the way I got into computers was that when I was growing up, at least, I'd read about computers in Isaac Asimov and so forth in sci-fi. I'd never seen one, right? Because at the time, the only computers in India were big mainframes or mini computers that were locked up in the IITs or in the big corporations, right? And some big like the weather department, because they need to calculate weather patterns and all that. So when I came to the States, I was like, okay, now I can take a programming class. And I took it and I found it really boring, right? Because it was very abstract. Like, sort this list of words. And I was like, okay, I can sort the damn list of words, but how is this going to help my life in any way? And then after I graduated, actually, when I was in film school in New York, I desperately needed to make money because New York is bloody expensive. So I got this job at this weird little medical office where we were, uh, the doctor's reports were sent to us, the handwritten reports, and we would type them up for court, right, for insurance cases. And while I was there, they shifted from typewriters to computers. And as soon as I got my hands on a computer, I could make my life much easier by like programming essentially these macros that the report that would have taken me an hour to type before, I could do it in 10 minutes, right? Because a lot of it was boilerplate text. And then I would pretend I was busy and goof off, right, for the rest of the hour. And then amazingly enough, I'm trying to write Red Earth and Pouring Rain. I'm walking around campus now, like holding these big computer books. And a friend of mine, another writer in the writing program, I set up a computer for her. And a couple of days later, she told me, I have this friend who owns a bookstore. Can you set up the computers, his new computers for him? He'll pay you. And I was like, shit, somebody will pay me to do this crap. And so I ended up actually being able to make a pretty comfortable living while a graduate. I worked my way through grad school without taking any loans, right? Which is a big deal here in the States.
Yeah.
People get into really heavy debt, like especially if you want to pay for an arts degree, right? It makes no sense to take loans, but people end up doing it. So then after I got a job, university job teaching creative writing, I kind of, I stopped doing it professionally, but I have an obsessive interest in it. Like, I don't think you can see it, but back there's a whole bunch of like too much computer equipment that I should have not bought in the first place, and that I now need to discard because it's all old and junky. So for me, I think like the precision of programming a machine is a kind of relief from the fuzziness of writing fiction, right? Because when you're programming, you have the problem statement is already there, right? I need to, I don't know, I need to print 17 copies of this PDF on that other printer on the other side of the house, right? So how am I going to do that? I mean, that's a very bad example, but basically, you know what you're trying to do, right? And then you engineer something that solves that problem, right? So it's very different from my other writing process where it's like all about, what the hell am I trying to do? I don't know where I'm going. I'm so desperate right now. This is so depressing, right? All of that. So there's a kind of nice contrast between the two. So I feel like it's fun to go back and forth from one to the other. I mean, but
Also, you find to use semicolon so many times, which you can't use in normal writing.
yes, yeah, and curly brackets, right?
And curly brackets. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, and then this sort of lifelong obsession recently became a thing because one of the things that's always frustrated me in writing in contemporary word processing environments is that you're writing your text, right? And then I go pretty heavy on the research. So I make lots of notes about characters. I have photographs that I've taken, but there's no way to connect that information to the text, right? So what we've created is a program called Granthika. And what that does is it keeps your notes, your character arcs, your timelines, it's all right in there with your editor, right? So with one keystroke, you can jump from a character's name to whatever notes you have about her and jump right back, right? So it's like a weird marriage between a word processor and a database and a timeline, right? So it's all in one place. So yeah, I mean, I hope I don't make it sound like using this thing you need to be a rocket scientist. Our youngest user is 7 years old, and she's happily like writing her stories within it.
Nice.
Yeah. But that's kind of eaten up my life for the last 3 years. I'm finally back to writing fiction now that we've released version 1. So I'm using Granthika to write my new fiction. And so I don't know, was that an answer to the software? Oh, and Granthika doesn't replace the writer, right? In any sense, right? So it's more like it just enables you to be more creative, right? Because you're not dealing with all that bookkeeping stuff, right?
Yeah.
Like especially timelines are really like hard to keep track of, right? Because I write stuff in which the characters' actions are set against real events, right? If Sartaj is a first responder to the bomb blast in Worli, then I can't make him like 10 years old in 5 years before that, because he would have to be joined the cop force when he was 13, right?
Right.
And so it sounds kind of simple to do this, but it actually takes up an insane amount of time to do this kind of thing,
Yeah.
right? So typically you have like a hand-drawn timeline on your wall and all of that stuff. So it's just a way of making life easier for writers, so you can concentrate on the writing and not on the bookkeeping.
You know what I thought was interesting was that it took you 3 years to create Granthika, which is less time than it does according to your own analysis of writing a novel. So,
Yeah.
okay, I'll just take just a couple of super chats, and then KV, let's take a last question from you. Datta says nobody questions why we have 7 to 8 liquor shops in every area. Clue: money laundering. I don't know what provocated that, but thanks for the information, and it makes sense, and we agree with you. You are correct, though. There's a lot of that happening. KV, let's take your last question, and I'll put, by the way, Granthika in the comments and the description so you can
Thank you.
go get it. Yeah, KV.
My last question, Vikram, is something I think I'm sure you've always asked as a prolific, not a prolific in your you admitted it, but as an acclaimed writer, so to speak, is that if there's someone who's watching this podcast slash stream, and including myself, who one day dream to write a book, what are some things that you've learned over the course of last 25 years and more that you think you would want to advise us as like as our senior in some sense?
Well, okay, so I have a whole spiel about this because at Berkeley I teach creative writing, so I have a lot of young students. So my sort of rules of thumb are like you got to treat it like a job, right?
Okay.
You have to show up at your desk at a set time every day to the best extent you can, and then sit your butt down and just stay there, right? So even if you have, all of us have day jobs, right? And so even if you can only do it for an hour and a half a day, just make sure you're there, right? And one of my favorite lines about this is from Picasso. He said, "Inspiration exists, but it has to find you at your desk when it comes looking." Right? Um, and so that is a huge, huge thing. The other is like I find it efficient in terms of my process is that I set a daily word target, right? So what I mean by that is I'll try and write. For me, it's 400 words, and I know many writers who do this. My wife does 600. I know people who do 1,000. But what you need to do is that you sit down and then you try and work towards 400 words. And what I'll do is, if I reach the 400 words before my allotted time, which is usually around 3 or 4 hours in the morning, I'll knock off, right? Then the rest of the time feels like a holiday, right? But then if it doesn't come, you still sit at your desk, just stare at the damn screen or down at your paper, but you stay there. And what that does is that it maintains a kind of consistency of effort, right? And my kind of cliche about this is that writing is a marathon, not a sprint, right? And so you keep doing this day after day, month after month, and amazingly, one day you'll have a finished, like a manuscript that is book length, right? And otherwise, I think going back and forth and it's too like consistency of effort. I think counts more to me than like sort of bursts of effort. Um, and then you've got to read as a writer, right? And what I mean by that is that um, like if something really affects me, if something makes a profound kind of impact on me, um, the first 2 or 3 times I read it, I still, because I'm so sunk in it, I'm so deep in the experience, I won't be able to tell how they did that to me, right? What exactly are the techniques that you're using that you're able to effectively do this to me? So then you reread and reread until you start seeing the bits and pieces, right? The actual craft that has gone into making this sublime experience, right? And then what you can do once you do that is that you can start stealing, right? You understand how good art works, and then you absorb that technique and then try and deploy it in your own fiction, right? Or whatever it is that you're doing. And I'm sure it works in other arts as well, right? You guys must do this as comedians when you're watching somebody on stage who's really good, right? It must be.
I mean, I'm so original that I don't need to take from anyone. Like, I'm such a original thinker.
Right.
Comedian got Sorabh to learn. Like Sorabh is
Yeah.
one of he's being watched.
Yeah. I mean, I
No,
guess
but
sorry, go ahead.
yeah, but you're right. It is. I think. I mean, that's one of the reasons why we do open mics to test out material. And
Mhm.
one of the things that infuriates all of us is that when you're doing open mics to test out material, and young comedians who are probably in the first 3 4 months do their set and disappear, and we are
Mm.
like, why are you here?
Yeah.
just watch the rest. I mean, the whole point of this entire exercise is also for you to see what people
Yeah.
are doing correctly and incorrectly as well. Because I mean, in an open mic, you're testing out stuff, so it's almost like the 400 words that you're writing, we are
Yeah.
performing on a regular basis. And so yeah, that's. But
Yeah.
what I thought is interesting was that you said 400 words because I mean the thing that I've been going with is the Stephen King thing of 2,500, which always seemed like very ambitious. So 400 words means it's effectively one Microsoft Word page if that's what you use.
Yeah. A
So
little
you do
over.
one, yeah, a little more than that, yeah. So it's one page in a day.
Yeah. I mean, I think you should do whatever is achievable and comfortable for you, right? I mean, again, like the other thing, I recently did a webinar about like this precise thing, right? I called it something like a thriving writing life or something like that.
Right,
And my final thing was like, don't listen to what anyone said, right? My last tip was that don't listen to lists of tips, right? Because
right,
it's a
yeah,
making art is like it's a mysterious chemistry that happens inside deep somewhere inside you, right? It's not just your conscious brain, your thinking brain that is doing it. It's your entire body and like your
right,
spirit way down. So what
right,
works for that person over there is not going to work for you, right? So
yeah,
you need to like listen to all ideas. You need to absorb different techniques, but then figure out what works for you, and then keep doing that, right?
yeah,
And when I was younger, especially you get these books, become a writer in 21 days. So I mean, the better ones are not named like that. There's some
Yeah.
really brilliant books about the writing craft, but I would read those and then I would say, shit, I'm not doing, you know, elements 4 and 5 are absent from my practice, so I must start doing that from tomorrow. And then you like beat yourself up that you're not doing exactly that formula. It
yeah,
doesn't. There's no magic key to the kingdom that somebody's going to give you. Like I'm sitting here in Oakland offering you like the secret of becoming a writer. It's nothing like that. It's like um, it's figuring out who you are, what story you want to tell, and then riyaz, right?
Yeah.
Daily practice, and just doing it for months and months and months. Um, and then the other thing that you figure out somewhere along the way is that damn thing never stops. There's
right.
never a point at which it becomes easy, right? Like, oh, now I know what I'm doing. Like every bloody day, you guys know this as well, I'm sure, right? Every time you get up on the stage, so to speak, it's another terrifying discovery that you don't actually know what you're doing.
It's and especially now with the Zoom shows, it's the expectation is not only do you not know what you're doing, you're also constantly confused by how this is going to pan out with the technology. Like I did a private show recently, which is just the most incredible amount of chaos I've done in a long time. Because what happens in the Zoom show now is that somebody will heckle you and they'll say, "Hey, Popatlal, tu jaake mar," and then disappear. So then you're like, who the fuck said that? And this guy's like fucked off somewhere else and shut off his video. Out of like 300 people, like, Kon bola, kon bola? So that's another confusion. Um, uh, by the way, there's a very weird story I want to tell you. There's a friend of mine called James Thomas who lives in Canada. And he doesn't read books. And his wife and me keep talking about books all the time. And he was like, just to prove to us, he decided that he's going to read the biggest book by an Indian author he can find. And the two nominees at that point of time was Vikram said Suitable Boy and Vikram Chandra Sacred Games. And you lost out purely on length. I
Oh shit!
just want to put it out there. He read Suitable
Wow,
Boy because it's 1,300 pages. That's the only reason to make that
wow,
choice. Yeah.
wow. Vikram like defeated me on those grounds.
Yeah, on the grounds of length. Uh, And the other thing was that when I was about, I think you're in Berkeley, right?
Yeah,
Yeah. So when I was, I think, about 21, I think Berkeley was one of the colleges offering a creative writing workshop even back then,
yeah.
probably 17 years back. And I was like, hey, I should do this. And then I didn't, because it's like they said that they want money and all. I was like, I don't have it. So I just gave up on
Yeah,
it.
yeah.
Okay. Bose Baba had a question, but I can't see a question, man. I don't know what your question was. You've sent super chat twice, but with no question in it. So I don't know what your question is. If you can ask it again, then I'll be happy to try and ask what it is. But otherwise, no. I just want to say thanks to Big Fat Panda. You're always a very nice and generous person. Bose Baba, I don't know what your question is, buddy. So if you've not asked a question yet, if somebody can ask that, that'll be great. Okay. Okay, that's about it. Vikram, thank you so much for your time. Just want to say
Yeah,
that
yeah.
Sacred Games. Also want to thank Rohan Joshi
Oh,
as a
yeah, yeah.
side note, because Rohan Joshi kept for literally like Sacred Games is one of those books which is like catch 22 for me, where catch 22 I attempted to read across literally 7.5 years. And then finally my brain was in the right zone and I read it. I'm like, oh
Yeah,
shit, why have I not read it for so long? It's the same zone of what I felt about it. So this has been a real honor that you spoke to us. I'm going to finish Love and Longing in Bombay. It was previously called Bangalore, and yeah, KV, please, what is say what you want, KV. Speak your mind, KV. This is
No, no,
your this is your
just
chance.
like, yeah, I just want to say thank you, Vikram, for this because we do this very often, but we rarely. It's very rare to find people on these chats who speak in a manner where you're just like, okay, he's not in a hurry. He's talking in detail about everything. He's giving us some respect. You know what I mean? Like in the sense that you were eager to listen to every banal, like very basic question that we had for you, and it was so awesome, and I cannot believe it's happening. That I'm
thank
talking to
you.
you.
It's a huge pleasure to be with you guys, especially in these surreal times, right? Like I mean, it's weird. I don't know if this happened to you. I'm talking to people that normally, like, I haven't talked to them for 15 years or something, right? Friends of mine. And suddenly,
Yeah,
because this stupid lockdown, I'm like, oh, chalo, baat karte hain, Zoom karo.
yeah.
So it's been quite extraordinary. And so, stay safe, everyone. And then the next time I'm in Bombay,
Yeah. Mumbai. It is Mumbai, my city.
yeah,
Um,
I hope we can hang out and get a chai or coffee or a drink.
Oh, 100%. Or we can do a Zoom party with the alcohol. A friend of mine told me a story where they were having a Zoom party with alcohol and they started doing shots, and two people spilled it on their laptops. And I'm like, that's just the smartest idea to start doing shots on Zoom and spilling it on your laptop. Again, I will put the link for Granthika in the comments and description. So do if you're a writer, then please go check it out. And KV, do you have anything to plug? Vikram, is there anything you'd like to just say at the end? Anything you'd like to plug to people, because quite a decent number of people are watching.
Yeah. No, Granthika is about it. Go check it out. And under there's like a page for webinars. You'll find a bunch of stuff for writers. Uh, so you might find that useful as well.
Awesome. KV, anything coming up?
No, I just want more people to read. That's what I say. Please read. Please don't just go on YouTube videos and comment and like spread hate on internet. Spend that time to read. Trust me, you'll thank us later. Please read. Read.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, it's so weird about what you just said right now. This is why you're such an insightful human being. Where it's like if you spend that time reading, you won't have that much of hate in you, because you're like, I'm reading. Just shut up. Just do your thing and let me read. Just leave me alone to read this book. And that answers the question somebody asked earlier about Nitesh Raut asked how to develop this habit of reading book. I always wanted to develop it, but now apps like Audibles are making me lazy. This is a very good question. Listening to a book on Audible is counted as reading, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Weird.
Skeptical.
We never thought we'll answer like this. Like recently, someone was talking about Malcolm Gladwell, and someone replied on the group saying, "Yeah, I listened to him." And for a second, we were all like, "What?" And then we realized, "Oh, he listened to it
Yeah.
on Audible." But
Okay,
I
most
still like on that front, I still haven't been able to listen to fiction yet.
right.
I don't know if I'll be able to, but I'm slowly trying to sort of listen to non-fiction in the
Right.
sense like purely non-fiction where I don't have to like keep a track of the characters and storyline. You just listen. You it's almost like a podcast, right? Like things like
Yeah,
Ikigai or like one of these like
Yeah.
non-fiction. But I'm not
yeah.
sure how people are fiction because it's
I'm able to listen to podcasts, but fiction for me, that kind of disappearance into the world of the fiction, that doesn't happen if I'm listening.
Yeah.
exactly.
By the way, Bose Baba has resurfaced said, what is the difference between book versus web series version? That's the question he's been itching to ask for a while. I'll tell you the list. I made a full list of all this, of all the differences. And again, if you've not read the book or seen the TV show, then just like don't watch this part. One is Sartaj's thumb. It exists throughout the book. There is a thing about the sex in the ashram that's on there. Gaitonde's sexual orientation is also not there. Cuckoo, and please correct me if I'm wrong. After I'm done, you can please tell me. What Vikram said earlier about the relationship between Parulkar and Sartaj was completely different in the book versus the TV show, versus the web series, sorry. And Gaitonde meeting Sartaj's dad in the ashram was also completely different. Relations between Guru and Gaitonde completely different. And of course, there's a whole leap of faith which they took brilliantly, by the way, in the TV show, which was about Cuckoo, which was just a 3-page thing in the book, which turned into a pretty pivotal character in season 1. So, was there
Yeah.
any others that I missed?
Well, I mean, for me, the major one was that in the book, Sartaj is completely gray, right? He's not a good guy or a bad guy, like in terms of corruption, at least. He takes small bribes because that's the only way for him to survive as a policeman, which is actually reality, right, for a lot of people. But the notion of the honest cop, the virtuous cop in the series was structurally necessary, I think, or at least they felt that that was the way to go. Yeah.
Yeah. KV,
But
do you remember anything else that we missed?
I just remember a lot of bike rides to Lonavala that
yes,
Sartaj used to do in the book.
yeah.
That happens in the web series. But
Oh
he used to
yeah.
just
No, and also poor Sartaj doesn't have a love interest in the series.
Yeah. Oh
Right?
yeah, he has that the this one's sister. Yeah.
Mary, yeah.
Yeah. That was very interesting. So there your question is answered. Vikram, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it. KV, always a pleasure. And I'm going to see you on 31st when we are interviewing Harsha Bhogle. And so that's going to be fun. And then again, William Dalrymple in September, whichever date we do. Vikram, this has been very nice. It's been very easy and chilled out to talk to you and coordinate with you, and you've been nothing but wonderful. So I really appreciate that.
My pleasure.
And yeah, and it's you know what the most surprising part about this whole experience, as KV said, is that people you're fans of, and you're like, but I'm your fan. Why are you being nice to me? It's just a weird.
when like it's night there, like it might be late for Vikram to be chatting with us. But he's like he never like he was never like you know what I mean, Sorab. You get that body language, no where you're like,
Yeah.
yeah, sorry. How much? You said 45? Like I never felt that way. You know, it's like, oh my god, he's actually listening, answering in detail.
Super. Thank you so much. You guys can just switch off your videos. I'll just say my goodbyes and a couple of things to announce. Thank you, Vikram. Thank you, KV.
Bye.
Bye bye. Okay. I just wanted to say tomorrow on Sunday we have Gursimran Khamba, Amit Tandon, and Neeti Palta. Neeti will join at 12 o'clock, just to tell you. Tuesday we have Sumaira Sheikh and Hussein Zaidi, who we've discussed at length here. We're going to discuss all his books, but that's happening at 4 p.m. on Tuesday because Hussein is not free during the day. I tried negotiating the timing for 3 weeks, so I couldn't get it to change. Thursday, we hopefully have Kanmasti, but if anybody is familiar with Jose Cavaco and Cyril Diabro, you'll know that that is more of a suggestion than a confirmation. Hopefully, they'll make it on time. Then that's on Thursday. Saturday is Cyrus Brocha and Kunal Vijayakar. Then next Sunday is, I think next Sunday is the EIC reunion. I've completely forgotten. I'll announce the dates in a bit. And yeah, sorry for snapping initially. And I agree. I shouldn't be snapping at people. I shouldn't be snapping at Manav. It's just I haven't slept in 3 days. I don't know why that's an excuse. I should be snapping at people, and I should be arrested for my behavior. And I'm a terrible person. I apologize for all of it. Sunday is a holiday. Sorry, yeah. Oh, I forgot. The next Sunday is a holiday because on Monday we have Harsha Bhogle at 11 o'clock with Anu Menon, Kumar, Varun, and Harsha Bhogle. So lots of stuff coming up. I pretty much schedule these shows till September 5th or 6th now. So keep coming back. It's mostly Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, Sunday, except when I announce otherwise. And shows are coming up on 29th and 30th of August. So tickets are on sorabhpant.com. Once again, you can keep supporting this podcast like you guys have been doing on a regular basis on Instamojo and PayPal. I'll put the link in the description. And dude, you guys are keeping this whole thing running and keeping it interesting. So thanks a lot. I really appreciate it. And thanks to Manav and Niharika once again, and to all the mods who are modding away to glory. Kajol, Agarwal, and Sharanya Deva. Thanks a lot to you guys as well. Appreciate it, guys. And also, yeah, there's a second channel which we started, which has all snippets from this particular show. I'll put the link of that also in the description. So much things to put in description, Baba. That are snippets, so you can go check that out. We are uploading a video pretty much every day on at 4 p.m. And Manav is also saying, please make memes. Make memes if you want to make memes. Go ahead and do it. Great one, Sorabh. Thank you for coming today, guys. Appreciate it. And sorry to one person whose super chat I didn't read. Thanks, guys. Got ahead. I'll see you guys tomorrow at 11 o'clock again. Bye.